Hi everyone, it's 1 p.m. and welcome to the second in our series of webinars from WantToBeGreatManager.com, looking at taking control of your development. I'm Clinton Wingrove. I'm delighted to be with you. Some of you, I notice some old friends coming back, will know me as the HR anarchist. I've got a passion for ensuring that in organizations we get the very best out of people, and that we help develop people, that we achieve the best that we can. And that comes from many, many years ago when I was responsible for leading the design of some automation and processes and systems for a major distribution center. And one of the things I learned was that technology is an enabler, but actually it's the quality of management that brings out the value from that technology. And I was at a network meeting this morning organized by a Chamber of Commerce, and there was lots of discussion about what's happening in the world today with millennials, etc. And I was quite refreshed that as the morning went on, the conversation steered from the usual that it's the millennials to the problem, to acknowledging what's really happening, and that is technology and many other things, globalization, virtual working, etc., have created the perfect storm. And increasingly, people are communicating virtually rather than face to face. And what we've got now is a generation that's very good at creating connections, generating likes, but they're not building relationships. And the challenge is we have a generation of managers who failed to recognize that challenge and failed to adapt to their ways of working to ensure that they get the best out of people. And it's confirming something that my research showed, which is the significant differentiator of sustainably successful organizations is the caliber of their management and leadership. To what extent are they capable of inspiring, exciting, and developing those who work with and for them? And there's lots of things that have happened which have probably led to me being known as the HR anarchist. And that is a challenge in many organizations. Why we promote people, promoting people as rewards for good achievements, but not for their capability to manage. Often providing little training prior to people being appointed into management. I don't know about you, but I'd never let my electrician learn on the job. I'd never let my gas fitter learn on the job. And yet in many organizations, we give people responsibility for other people and then expect them to learn on the job. Little attention to post development. I see lots of organizations saying, well, we've got this learning management system. We give people the ability to access YouTube and TEDx and TED.com and so on. Accessibility to developed material does not produce changes in behavior or increase skill. If accessibility produced behavior change, we'd all be incredibly healthy in the Western world because we've got access to good quality food, and we'd all be fit because we've got the ability to exercise. So accessibility does not produce development. And then managers are often overloaded and distracted. You know, for many reasons, the crash, etc., organizations have focused on increasing spans of control, but they've not equipped the managers with the ability to develop in-depth individual relationships with the staff working for them, given that overloading. And consequently, they're often distracted, and we end up leaving them in what I call the DIY development. So in the last webinar, and any of those of you who didn't attend it, we will be sending out at the end of this webinar a link so that you can connect to that prior one. In the last webinar, we explained that there are three critical things that are needed if managers are going to significantly develop their skills. One is they need detailed structure or content, and we've empirically developed what we've called the Quaternion profile. It's a list of skills. There are four components of that structure, and each of those components then has 13 elements. So 52 skills in total. which we know are really important foundation skills for any manager who wants to be successful. Again, at the end of this webinar, we will be sending a copy of that profile out to all of you, even if you didn't attend webinar 1. The second thing that managers need, having identified all the skills that they then need a process for developing. And in many organizations, those processes are inadequate. It's often an annual discussion. It might be selected people getting coaching and following something like the GROW model. In others, there might be an annual or a quarterly training needs analysis. But managers need a process that takes them through step by step, working out what it is they need to work on, identifying how they can do that, and then managing that through to realizing success. And that's what we're going to focus on in the webinar today. But the third thing then is, and in many organizations, they've got some form of competency model, often oversimplified for purpose, and they've often got an oversimplified process. But what then is lacking is that ongoing support. Having a commitment to develop is a bit like having a commitment to lose weight. It doesn't mean you're going to do it. Having a plan is a good step forward, but again, it doesn't mean when we're going to do it. And year upon year, I've put in my calendar that I'm going to decorate the house or paint the windows, but that's actually far from effective. So we do need ongoing support, and we'll be covering that briefly at the end of this webinar, but that will be the subject of the third webinar in the series, where we'll also have a guest speaker join us to talk about what can actually be done if you do have that ongoing support. So let's move on then and look at today. Our philosophy is that development matters, and it probably matters more now than it ever has. We live in a volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world, as some people call it. I prefer to say we live in a very noisy, distracting, digital and virtual world. We are constantly having to adapt to what we see. And one of my old bosses used what I thought was quite a powerful analogy. And he said, most of us as we go through life at some point decide to invest in a home. We might invest in renting, but many of us try and invest in acquisition. And he said, it's very rare that what we actually acquire is our ideal home. But what really determines our long-term success and happiness is what we then do. Do we allow, through complacency, distraction, attending to the urgent rather than the important, allow that home to degenerate, to slowly fall away, and often without realizing it? And then suddenly we wake up one day and realize that that's happened. And his analogy was how many managers get so excited at having been appointed, they then focus in on achieving the results. They pay some attention to the development of their people, but their own development remains important but never seems urgent. So as a consequence, it never gets done. And progressively, the structure of their knowledge and skills starts to degrade. Whereas a relatively small percentage actually take the time to think through and view things longer term. They realize that attending to the important, if they attend to the important, it very rarely becomes urgent. And as a consequence, they can start out with some basic skills, build on them, extend, add new extensions, add new skills, add new knowledge, and consequently their capability grows, and so does their success. So a rhetorical question for you is, to what extent are you, the person who's bought that initial home and allowing it to slowly deteriorate? And to what extent are you refurbishing, fixing it up, extending it, building your skills? And most of you are HR professionals, I see. To what extent are you ensuring in your organization that your managers view development in that way? And see, the problem is we have struggled to decide who's actually responsible for development. And in many organizations, that's not clear. Very often, managers believe that it's the responsibility of their boss to develop them. Some of them believe it's the responsibility of the organization at large. The real issue is, at the end of the day, we're each individually responsible for our own development, and the message needs to get through to managers that that is the case, because the fact is we do actually develop every single day. The problem is, if that development is not planned, we may be developing the wrong things. And time again, in my experience, I come across managers who every day are having new experiences, every day are doing new tasks, every day are meeting new people, but they're failing to tap into those experiences as learning opportunities. And instead, they're reinforcing their own habits. They're doing things in the way they've always done. And certain types of personality encourage us to do that. Often make use of something like DISC or Insights, where you get a very simple overview of the type of person you are. For some of us, we have a natural preference for preserving the status quo. The problem is, in development terms, that can be the very thing that's holding us back. So the first thing that we try to do in WantToBeGreatManager.com is we want to ensure that people believe in themselves and realize that we're all limited far more by our negative self-beliefs than we are by our talent. Many years ago, as some of you will know, I did some research with Dr. Paul Marciano in the US, and we looked at the extent to which people's self-beliefs affect their talent. And what we found was that groups of people who were relatively low in talent compared to the prima donnas, the stars in the companies, but if they worked extremely well together, if they capitalized on the strengths, if they respected each other and collaborated, the things they could achieve were virtually limitless. So we need to ensure that within our organizations, managers understand that development is something that's critically important. Development is something that they should take responsibility for because they're the ones who benefit. And that actually, even with their existing talent, if they learn how to apply it better, breaking any self-beliefs that they have, they can achieve amazing results. And the question is, how do you do that? So we need to think about how people do develop. And it's now well known that the vast majority of our knowledge and our skills is typically acquired through doing meaningful work. So managers who believe that to invest in development is going to take time away from the family, it's going to cost them huge amounts of money, their company's not providing the budget, we've got to get across to them that actually every day they have a wide range of opportunities presented to them, no matter what they do, that they can use for development purposes. And some of those things may even happen outside of work. This concept of work-life balance, most of us now see that this is actually a continuum. So often personal experiences create opportunities for people to develop. So we need to think about what the process might be. And in a moment, we're going to spend most of the webinar looking at the WantToBeGreatManager.com process. It's a variation on a common theme, but it brings a structure and it enables managers who are not experts in development, who don't have access to coaches, who don't get invited to attend frequent training and development programs. It gives them a means by which they can take control of their own development and become highly effective at doing that. But the issue about believing in themselves is critically important, because we need managers to have an attitude which is they're going to approach every day as a learning opportunity. They're going to approach every challenge they face as a learning opportunity. They're going to approach feedback that they get as a learning opportunity. So the combination of process and attitude are quite important. And we're going to come back to this issue of attitude in the third webinar when we look at setting up for ongoing support. How do we within our organizations set ourselves up so that managers are supported without investing in technology and extensive resources? And how do we equip ourselves to have the right attitude to develop? So let's go back to the process. Let's start with something we're probably all familiar with, which is the classic reflect starting step. Most people, when they say they're going to look at development, they're advised, well, reflect on where you are. How did you get here? What are you like? What can you do? And having reflected, you can then plan. You can then plan your development. And of course, having planned, you're then going to act. And in many organizations, I see this presented as the model that managers follow. What's interesting is when I then talk to those managers doing individual coaching or facilitating workshops and development activities, what I find is that they actually struggle because of the simplicity. The simplicity often makes it more difficult to work with than something more complex. And those of you who attended webinar 1 will remember that we argued one of the values of the quaternion profile is that it defines very specific, clearly observable behaviors which demonstrate specific knowledge and skill. Because it's specific and detailed, it's easy to understand. The same is true we find of the process. It's not very helpful to tell a manager development is easy. You need to reflect on the skills that you've got, identify what you need to improve, plan to do that, and then take action. Because the question is how? How do I reflect? How do I plan? How do I act? So what we do in the WantToBeGreatManager.com process is we equip managers with the skill to do that. We say reflecting is composed of a number of things. Firstly, if we're going to reflect, we need to get ourselves ready. What do I mean by get ready? Well, we can't suddenly just turn away from our desk and say, okay, I'm now going to start planning my development. Getting ready means getting into the right mindset. And I've already touched on that already. We need to actually take a little bit of time to think through, how do we get to where we are? What is it about us that is adding value? The fact that we've been recruited, the fact that we've been promoted, the fact that we've been given responsibility for people, that should tell us something. It should give us confidence. It should help us to stop questioning our ability. In order to get ready, we need to get a mindset that says, I can develop, I can be better than I am now. It's going to be relatively easy because look how far I've come from being a spotty teenager to being a successful manager, or at least a newly appointed manager. And that means thinking about as well, what are the pros and cons? So one of the first things I ask managers to do is to think about what are the pros of investing in your development and what are the cons? And what I often find again is they'll give me simple answers. They say, well, if I develop, I might be more successful, I might earn more. And if I don't develop, I'm going to stagnate. I say, yeah, but let's be more precise than that. Let's say what exactly is going to happen if you don't develop. If you don't develop, you're probably not going to be promoted. If you don't develop, you're probably not going to be successful. If you don't develop, new people coming in are going to leapfrog over you. If you don't develop, you're probably not going to be invited to participate in things, get your views known. You're going to have a miserable life. And in marketing, there's a well-known concept that you have to use get away from marketing. You have to get people to recognize the downside of something before they're energized to think about the positive. But you do then need to quickly move into the go-to. So you then need to look at the pros. But getting managers to think about the consequences of always leaving their development on the to-do next week list, or as I refer to it as the procrastination list, is one of the first things we have to do in the process to get people ready. And that's about thinking about what's actually going to stop me develop, what's actually going to help me to develop, and then making that personal commitment. I am going to do something. The second step then is looking ahead. And it's interesting, people say, well, why is looking ahead under reflect? Well, we've got to reflect on how do we get to where we are? And the probability is many of us got to where we are partly through luck, partly through accident, and partly through planning. So by reflecting on how we got to where we are, most managers start to realize the importance of looking ahead. What are the challenges that they're faced with? What are the aspirations that they've had? And what they frequently find is the challenges ahead could have been easily met if they'd thought about it earlier. The aspirations they have, they've probably missed opportunities already to develop. So part of reflecting is about looking ahead. So during this step of the process, we get managers looking at what are their aspirations, what are their challenges, what's really important. And that then starts to help them identify what their real signature strengths and what their potential limitations are. So reflection is also about how equipped am I to face these challenges? How equipped am I to achieve these aspirations? And so getting people to think that through starts to then sensitize them. And then the question is, so what direction do I want to take? Because development, you can't develop generally. You can only develop specifically. I can't come in tomorrow and decide I'm going to be a better manager. Well, what does that mean? So in the third component of reflect, we look at what is it that you'd like to achieve? Would you like to be recognized as a real expert in your field and perhaps stay in your role for a considerable time? In other words, improve your on-job performance. Would you like to move into a strategic role and have responsibility for managing managers? Would you like to just be a better manager and be known for the person who brings in talent and creates great employees in the process? So in the third step of the reflect process, we say, think back to the things that you've enjoyed doing, you've liked doing, the things you find easy. What are the things that really are the things that get you going, the things that excite you, the things that are going to give you what we now call that employee experience? What is it that's going to make you, in a couple of years' time, go home saying, wow, I've had a great day? Because that's going to give an indication as to where you should direct your development. The fourth step then is, so what resources do you have? And immediately people often think about, we've got e-learning and I've got access to a coach and so on. Resources is much broader than that. It's what resources do you bring? Yeah. How do you develop? How have you acquired your skills over time? Think back to those things that you're really good at. How have you achieved that? What's produced that? By all means, also look at what resources you have access to. And if the organization has e-learning, etc., I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing. I'm just suggesting on its own, it's not going to be dramatically useful to you. You need to know what type of resource to access, when to resource, what sequence, and how to go about it. And faced with 2 or 3 choices, which choice to choose. So thinking about those aspects of resources, and then thinking about who in the organization can help you. Remember, we said 70% of your development is going to come from actually doing things, but about 20% is going to come from your interactions. So in the reflect stage, we also get individual managers thinking about, who am I surrounded with? Who are the people that I know who are good at things? Who can I observe? Who can I learn from? Who could coach me? Who could mentor me? Who could provide input? Who could I emulate? Those are all resources that you can tap into. So the WantToBeGreatManager.com reflect process is broken down into those 4 basic components. There is an advanced version which goes into even more detail, but we take managers through a series of videos and through a series of activities and a workbook into looking at each of those 4 components so that they can really understand, who am I and how did I get here and where is it I'd like to get to? The second step then is plan. And how many of us, rhetorical question, how many of us have been on a training program, and at the end of the training program, the facilitator or the trainer says, write down your action plan, and I want a specific action, a specific outcome, and a time by which you're going to do it. Yeah. If only development were that incredibly simple. The first step in the WantToBeGreatManager.com process says, when you're thinking about the plan, the first thing you need to think about is, where do you want to be by when? And in simple terms, what is it I want to be able to do by when? What will that look like? We can't start planning with the action. We have to start planning with identifying what the outcome will be. So that's looking at the type of results. And this is where the Quaternion profile comes in useful. It provides managers with a checklist of 52 competencies, each of which is defined by 4 anchor behaviors, which could be able to do things that people can use as a checklist. It helps them to break through that mental block, which is, what is it I need to be able to do? The second element in the process step then is looking for the route options, helping managers to understand, what do development options look like? And that's getting people to think through the different situations they're faced. Are they presented with opportunities to participate in tasks they've not participated in before, to volunteer for projects, to cover their boss when their boss is on vacation, to shadow one of their staff, to really learn what their staff do, to actually go and visit with a client department or a client customer, to look at what the outputs of their work actually is, and looking for, how do any of those scenarios, those situations, those tasks, how do they present opportunities to develop? And sometimes it's about doing things, taking a task on that perhaps they've not done. Sometimes it's actually the observation or participating and shadowing people who are doing things they'd like to be able to do. So we talk in very practical terms about, if you want to be able to do something, how are you going to be able to acquire that? How are you going to be able to start doing it and practice doing it and get feedback and input and observation from people who are already skilled? And then, of course, the question is, well, from all of those choices, what am I going to do? And this is where that initial reflection comes in. If we're clear about how we prefer to actually go about learning things. And I know there's a strong debate around whether there is such a thing as learning styles. But what I do know is that individuals have preferences for how they learn. And there are certain things that are more effective at teaching particular skills than others. So having reflected on how I've got to where I am, how I've acquired the skills that I have, and why I've not acquired skills which are now viewed as limitations, can help me make a more informed choice about the development activity I'll take. If I'm an individual who enjoys working with people, I enjoy being coached, I enjoy observing how other people do things, then I might choose development activities of that nature, being part of a project team, asking someone to work with me. If, however, I've identified that the skills that I need to acquire urgently and the ones that I've not acquired before are things that are probably best acquired on an individual level, perhaps reading a manual, trying something, experimenting with it, seeing the effect, then I may choose a different option. So we look in this third step at helping managers to identify how to make a really good choice. And for some people, going to the LMS, watching a video is a great learning opportunity. The problem is, very often through that means you learn about, you don't learn to do. It's very easy to watch a video on how to ride a motorbike. I bought a Vespa, I've had it for 2.5 years, and I'm still challenged to find the best way to ride that well. I can describe it to you, but putting it into effect is a quite different issue. So again, we have the same, it's an analogy with the issue for managers. And then moving on to the process step of act. It's very simple to say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to reflect, we're going to decide what we need to improve, we're going to plan it, and then we're going to put it into effect. And we all remember, I'm sure, our New Year's resolutions. January the 1st, we all commit we're going to eat healthier. We stock the fridge with salads. We're going to get fit. We either take up a gym membership, book a season ticket for the swimming club, buy ourselves a set of weights or a bicycle. And within a few weeks, the novelty has worn off. What we found is that for managers to develop, and particularly managers who are overloaded, distracted, managers who need to develop, they have to engage a support team. It's quite important that they have something that's going to help them to develop. And of course, there's organizations around the world that have actually, their claim to fame is how they work. Things like Alcoholics Anonymous, Weight Watchers, many other organizations are predicated on the basis that a support team helps you develop. What I'm finding is in many organizations, management is one of the loneliest jobs. Managers know that actually there's certain things they are going to have to do largely on their own, and they often don't feel that they have support. So during this part of the process, we encourage managers to think about how are they going to ensure that they're triggered to do the things that they've identified they need to do. What's going to trigger them to act? What's going to stop these things staying on that to-do next week list or the procrastination list? How are they going to learn from other people? Who are the individuals that they're going to get to coach them or going to allow them to observe how they perform, or who are going to give them feedback? So part of acting is engaging a support team, people who are going to trigger you to do the things that you do, people that are going to give you the input, people that are going to give you access so you can observe them, people who might coach you, and most importantly, the people who are going to give you the encouragement, the reward, the recognition when you've actually done something. So first step in ACT is engage the support team. It's not actually going out and doing stuff. The second step then is equally not about doing stuff. What we find is that we've got to make sure that managers who are going to engage in development, and frankly, anybody, but our focus is on managers. We believe that middle management is the engine of organizations. That's where, as HR professionals, we're going to see the biggest return on our investment. Improve the quality of management will improve the quality of the company. What we don't want is managers racing off, having set up the support team and then jumping into development. What we often find is if they do that, they try to do too much too soon. They take on something that's more complex than is necessary. So we think about in terms of how do they set off? What are the first initial steps? And this links back to the question of attitude. This is where attitude is quite important. So in WantToBeGreatManager.com, we want people at this point reflecting back. Why am I doing this? What's the pain I'm trying to fix? What's the benefit I'm trying to give? So that they can feel confident and justified in investing some time in it. The second thing is we want them to go back and think about their reflections. And in their reflections, remember, we'll have got them thinking about habits, how they may have developed a level of complacency, how they may have spent the last few years refining habits that are actually dysfunctional or inhibiting. So we want them to identify, before getting into what they're going to do new, what are the things perhaps they've got to stop doing? Part of what they've got to stop doing is telling themselves that development is not urgent, it can wait till next week. One of the things they've got to stop doing is believing it's going to be difficult. Therefore, I'll leave it till tomorrow because I've got more time tomorrow. What they've got to stop doing is those bad habits, which are their limitations, the things they've identified that are inhibiting them from meeting their aspirations, the things that are inhibiting them from meeting the challenges. So in this part of the ACT step, we say, take a step back. get the mindset right, think about prioritizing, make sure you understand that it's because development's important that it needs to be done today, because if you don't do it today, it will become urgent or possibly too late. There's a lovely quote, which I think I mentioned last time, which is, the best time for your development is past. It was yesterday. Today is your second best time. So how are we going to break those habits? How are we going to get our mindset right? How are we going to justify putting time in the calendar? And what I often say is, if you've done your planning well, by this point, you've already put times in your calendar because you believe it's important. You've planned meetings with yourself, meetings with your support team. If not, put those times in now. And only then do we talk to managers about the importance of the journey itself. And the journey itself is largely about a number of things. It's largely about making sure that we are triggered to do things. So during this journey, if I'm coaching a manager, I say, let's look at what you're planning to do over the next week or 2 weeks. Beyond that's probably looking quite a long way out. Let's look at the very short term. What's going to trigger you to do things? And if they tell me they're going to be triggered tomorrow to do something, I want to know tomorrow, did that happen? Were they triggered? And if not, why not? You know, if they didn't trigger themselves to do something, then what are they going to do to get someone else to trigger them to do it? Because we need those triggers early, triggers to stop us doing bad things, bad habits, triggers to start doing new things. The second thing I do is ask people, so what are the rewards you're building in? And it's very easy to say, well, the reward for development is promotion and greater pay. Yeah, we live in a world now where we want instant gratification. That's why we all check our email umpteen times a day. That's why we go out on social media and we do likes and so on. We are now in a world of instant gratification. If development is going to become as important as posting on social media, we need to have that gratification. So it might be as simple as getting managers to say, if I complete this one little step, I'm going to go take a 5-minute break. If I complete this one little step, I'm going to reward myself with a 5-minute session of Candy Crush. It might be, if I complete this one step I've planned, I'm going to have that nice latte. I don't care what it is, but we've got to get people understanding that if development is going to happen, we've got to create development activity that has that gratification built in. We cannot expect it to be done purely because of belief in the goodness of development. That does not work. So in WantToBeGreatManager.com, we get people thinking about, what is it that's going to give them that reward, that gratification, to make sure that they take those short-term tactical actions that will lead to achievement of the long-term goal. And yes, we can't go further without saying something about checking on progress. And checking on progress is about what's worked and what didn't work. It's not, did we do the activity? I may have cycled round the block, but if I've done that in a certain way, I may have done more harm than good. Eating healthily, I may have eaten lettuce and tomatoes, but depending on the volume of it and the dressing I've put on it, I may have undone all the good. Development is the same. Just because I read a book does not mean to say I've acquired the knowledge of skill. Just because I've watched a YouTube video does not mean I've attained the knowledge and skill. And therein again is one of the problems in many corporate strategies at the moment, which is to go for web-based learning, e-learning, on-demand accessibility. If you've given managers access to development, you've done nothing to ensure skill development, because we are now again seeing a dramatic increase in people watching a video at the point that they need to do something new. That means that they are frequently not developing an adequate level of skill. They're operating on minimal level, and frequently they're not retaining it, which means we see repeat access. And simple examples, I see people who have issues with their email, and what they have is they remember the YouTube video that they watched to solve it. So time and time again, they watch the video without actually learning the skill. If they learnt the skill the first time, they wouldn't need to keep watching the video. So we need to get managers understanding what are the skills you need to develop, because you need to have access to them when you need them, not after you've watched a video. What are the skills you need to develop to a level that you can't acquire through a simple viewing of a video or going through an online course? So we need to get managers asking the question, has this development worked? What has worked? What didn't work? Why did it work? Why didn't it work? And that way we start to get managers to feel much more positive about the development, because they're focusing on the outcome of it, not merely the activity. The activity is sucking and demanding their resource. Whereas if they think about the output and whether it worked, they start to realize that their capability is growing, they are developing as an individual, and we start to shift that fundamental belief. Remember that belief that holds us back much more than our talent does. And then the last thing is realizing that actually development is a loop. It's about starting a new journey. But it's starting a new journey from where you've got to, not back from the starting point. And one of the things that really bugs me is the number of organizations I see, for example, where they have really sophisticated succession planning processes. And they'll identify that Clint is a potential SVP in a year's time. And that in order to be an SVP in a year's time, these are the knowledge and skills he needs to acquire. And guess what? You come back to the succession planning review the next year, and Clint is a potential SVP in a year's time. Why? Because development has been viewed as an event. It's not been viewed as a journey. So what we need to get is managers understanding that as they are acting out their development journey, they should be constantly thinking that it's about continuously seeing that as the start of the next one. This has to be a continuum. So we have to make that journey a habit. So where have we come? We've looked at a process. What we basically said is we need to have a disciplined, a sophisticated process. It's easy to apply because it's not oversimplified. So going back to our first webinar, we started off by saying we want managers who believe in themselves. And to do that, if they have a checklist of skills that they can use to check off, that will help them build their confidence. The Quaternion profile enables them to do that. We then have a process which is compatible with most organizations' reflect, plan, act, but we've broken it down into a series of easy to understand steps that an individual manager can take, apply to themselves with minimal support, and come out with a really effective way of building on the skills they've got, working out what to do about their limitations, and adding new skills. And we've stressed the importance of attitude. And attitude is very much around positivity. And we're all probably familiar with that cliche that do people view things as the glass as being half empty or half full? And of course, the engineers say, well, it's neither, the glass or the jar is too big. What we want is managers who realize that their glass is actually half full. And if they do the right things, they can personally take control and they can fill that talent vessel. They can do that by having a checklist of the skills that they need, foundational skills. There may be others that are going to enable them to excel, but there is a baseline set of skills that caliber managers need to have. Let's give them that checklist and help them to use that as a self-assessment. Let's give them a process that's sufficiently specific that they can apply it themselves with minimal support, but let's then provide them with the ongoing support they need to implement their plan. And frequently that support is not about training courses, materials, and coaching. It's frequently about things like triggering, providing feedback, recognizing and rewarding, which is going to enable them to maintain a positive development attitude. In webinar 3, we're going to go into that in a lot more detail. In webinar 3, which will be in approximately 4 weeks' time, we'll be circulating the date to all of you. We're going to look at how do you ensure in an organization ongoing support for management development so that people can put these things into effect. We're going to have a guest speaker that's going to talk to us about the importance of positive belief and how if you can break that pattern that our beliefs limit us more than our talent do, the sorts of things that you can achieve. And we're going to provide a special offer to the people who attend to give them access to much of the WantToBeGreatManager.com resources. One of the things we'll also be doing then is providing a summary of the Self-Development Journal. So following today's webinar, we will be sending through to all of you access to the videos from webinar 1. We'll be sending through the summary of the Quaternion profile, that checklist of skills that managers need in order to be effective. And we'll be sending through a summary of the Self-Development Journal with access to today's webinar as well, a video recording of today's webinar. And we'll send you the date and time of the next webinar where we will look at setting up for ongoing support. Thank you all for attending today. We're delighted to have you with us. We look forward to you joining us on the next webinar in approximately 4 weeks' time. We're just waiting for affirmation of the date and time. They'll be sending that through to you. If any of you have any queries, please feel free to email us. The email address is info@wanttobegreat.com. info@wanttobegreat.com. We look forward to hearing from you and look forward to working with you on the next webinar. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.